Welcome to the My Creative Days podcast, where we will talk about all things DIY, home decor, decorating tips, and creating a beautiful home on a budget. I am hoping our time together will spark a creative idea, help you plan your next DIY, or inspire you to finally tackle that project you keep putting off. Grab your favorite cup of motivation and let's chat. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm so glad you're here. Trying to get situated here. I always think I'm situated when I start this, and then I'm not situated. I need a deeper desk, I think, because the microphone takes up too much space. Today, I wanted to do a quick podcast for a question that I get asked often, and it's just kind of a reference podcast that'll kind of help you with sandpaper. So on your furniture pieces. So sandpaper, you need, I do have my favorite sanders, and I can leave a link for those in the show notes, because I get that question a lot. Forever, when I started, I had an orbital sander. That's just what I used. There is one that I like above the others, and believe me, we've had many. So I used an orbital sander, and then I got the Serve Prep sander, and that thing is a game changer. It is definitely an investment. I do have a coupon code that will help you on your order. So it's something that you could definitely put on your Christmas list, or put, if you're selling your flips, put aside a little bit of money every time you sell something, and definitely get it. I would highly recommend it. For new flippers that have been doing it for a long time, it's a game changer. I still do use my orbital sander for certain projects. We're doing tons of DIY projects, so the orbital sander is out all the time. But I get asked a lot about sandpaper and what grit sandpaper should I buy, and when do I sand? How often do I sand? All the things. Number one, I'm going to start off by saying, and I've said this before, if you are painting a furniture piece, you need to scuff sand your furniture piece, no matter what your can of paint tells you. So, if you're painting a piece of furniture, a scuff sand, even if the paint that you're using says you don't even need to sand, you don't even need to prep, you do. You need to scuff sand. You're just going to get a better outcome. Your primer, your paint, and everything is just going to adhere better to the piece. So there's number one. Now, when you're buying sandpaper, no matter what sander you have, an orbital, maybe you like to use a mouse sander, maybe you've just got a square sander, maybe you've got the Serve Prep, whatever. There's different sanding grits that you need to have, and it's not a one size fits all. So you definitely need a range of sandpaper on hand when you're doing furniture projects. And I'm going to go through what the different grits do and when you should use them. So hopefully I'm trying to make this podcast a short, easy one, so that you have this information. You can refer back to this when you're working on a project and kind of know what you need and what you need to stock up on. So first of all, the lower the grit number of your sandpaper, the coarser, can we make that a word? I don't know if that is a word. The sandpaper is, and the more it's going to tear up your piece. So think of sandpaper. The higher the number, the better the finish. Think that. The higher the number, the better the finish. The lower the number, the finish isn't going to be as nice. But yet you need the low number too. So what I'm trying to say is the coarse, grit sandpaper, the lower number, you're going to use that on certain projects. But if you're finishing a piece and want to get the final piece done, your grit is going to be so much higher. Okay. So just remember that. Keep that in mind. When I first started out, I'm like, wait a minute, which way does it go? The higher the grit number, the better the outcome. The finish, that's your result. That's the end result. The lower the number, that's really coarse, and that's not going to give you that finished look. So sandpaper, 60 to 80, and I'm going to caution you and say 80. You can go 60, and we definitely have it on hand for certain projects, but usually with a piece of furniture, an 80 is where you can start. Now, this is a coarse sandpaper. So when I am trying to, get off, what do I want to say, like scratches or just even out like the wood on the top of a piece. Maybe I want to get through some layers of whatever the piece, has on it. If it's a stain and paint, whatever, I'm going to use an 80 to get through those layers to see what the wood underneath looks like. An 80, if you have a stubborn, like a stain or, maybe you have a water stain or a ring of something, 80 is what you're going to grab. You definitely do not want to use an 80 on anything that is not real wood, because it's just going to ruin it. And with that being said, a 60, an orbital sander, they're strong. And like I said, we've used so many. And the one that I really like, there's a couple that I don't like at all. Like, I would never recommend them to anybody because they are so powerful and you just can't control them, that if you do have these more coarse sandpaper discs on them, you're going to ruin whatever you're sanding. So, when I say don't use, the 60 to the 80 on non-wood pieces, be very cautious depending on the sander you're using when you're using them on real wood as well. Because a 60 grit sandpaper, especially with some of those stronger orbital sanders, will ruin your piece like crazy. I don't feel like I have that ever with the Serve Prep sander, because it's just, you can what do I want to say, lower and I want to say upper, and that's not the right words, increase the rate at which it goes. You have so much more control on it. It's just not that sander. Like, I never worry about it because I have more control with that Serve Prep. But if you're using an orbital, which I used for years, I would tell any beginner that's the one to grab. I would ruin, furniture quickly if I had a 60 grit on there, if the orbital sander went too fast. So definitely a 60 to 80 you need. If you had to choose one, it's 80. 80. That's not going to rip through something as much as a 60 will. And depending on what you're doing, an 80 is where you could scuff sand, depending on, it's not a one size fits all, just depending on the finish that the piece has. You could definitely use, I just used yesterday before recording this podcast, an 80 to scuff sand a dresser. And so, it's definitely a very used grit sandpaper. 60 can get a little rough, but there are those pieces that you get, that it needs it. And matte, my hands are small, and so I can use an orbital sander just fine. But I feel like, Matt's got more strength in his hands, and his hands are bigger, that a 60 with an orbital. But even him, he's like, no, he'll put like a 60 on a piece if we've got like a tough stain or varnish or something to get through, and like instantly he's like, nope, this is just going to shred it. Like, it's just going to take, not do well. So you just got to be very careful. And with the 60 to 80, it's gonna kind of rough up the piece. It's not gonna give it a real smooth finish, if that makes sense. Okay, let's move on. So now we're gonna go from coarse to extra fine. So now we're like in the middle of the road, like a medium grit, 100 to 150. And anywhere in there, so 100, 120, 150, I kind of use all of those interchangeably, kind of. Like, I just need a step up from the 80, but yet I'm not really needing a fine, like really smooth out, like finishing sandpaper. So I definitely use these a lot. And it's the 100 to 120s, 150s. It's really good for, like if you've got a raw wood piece, it's a good one to start with to kind of smooth out the piece before you would add a stain or a primer or, whatever you're doing to it. It's kind of your middle of the road, kind of like your all-purpose sandpaper. So definitely have those on hand. Those different 100, 120, 150. The next coarse, or the next level, is like a fine sandpaper. So like 180, 200, 220. Those are your fine. That's like your fine grit sandpaper. And so this is a good one. So if you are prepping you're going to scuff sand a piece, you're kind of prepping it for paint, primer, or whatever. You use the 80 and you kind of got through the layer of the varnish. And then you used a 120 to just kind of smooth out what that 80 kind of roughed up. And then, a 180, a 200, 220 is good to just go over it before you apply a primer or a paint or your stain, whatever you're putting on it, just to kind of smooth it out and give it a good base to kind of put those on, to put that what am I going to say? The paint, whatever, on. One thing to remember is, like a 60 to an 80 grit sandpaper, those, if I'm using those, like I've got a piece to go through, I'm going to fly through those, meaning those are going to get used up faster, if that makes sense, because they're doing the most work, right? You're trying to get through a stain. You're trying to get through layers of paint. You're trying to get down to the raw wood. Think of it that way. So those are going to take, it's like you'll be using them and it's, you'll just like this have to be changing sandpaper. So you definitely go through those faster because they're doing the hard work. When you get up to like the 150s, 180s, 220s, it's kind of like you're just smoothing out the piece. So I feel like those sandpapers, even up to the extra fine that we're getting to, the 320s, the 280s, those, they last longer, right? Like you can use them on multiple projects because you don't use them for long. You're just smoothing out a piece, right? They're not like going through layers and layers where the grit of like a 60 to 80 is going to get worn down a lot faster. I hope that makes sense. So just think like you're from like 120, 150s up to like 320. Those are gonna be, you can use them over and over again through a few projects, which is a good thing to remember. Your 60 to 80 though, like you're gonna need a lot of those on hand because, and like I said, mostly 80, because they're doing that hard work and they get worn down and worn out very easily. So, okay, we're gonna go to extra fine, which is anywhere from 250 to 320. This is what you're going to use between coats of paint. This is just going to give you that flawless, smooth finish. If you're brushing pieces, maybe you've got a few brush strokes that you just kind of need to kind of, get down, but yet you're not trying to like get down through the paint, right? You just kind of need to smooth out the surface. Anything 280 to 320. And, start with a 320 and see, and then work your way down. It's kind of like any of these grits. Always start with where you think, and then you can always, you're going to have all of these on hand. So I will tell you, even now after 20 years of doing this, there's many times I'm like, oh, I definitely need an 80 here. And then I'll get it on there and it's not even cutting through it, so I have to go to a 60. Or it's going through it too fast and not doing what I want it to do, so that I bump it up to a 100. So definitely, you'll be interchanging these and start, what do I want to say? Start less coarse in the beginning because you don't want to ruin something. And then you can always work your way down. But that 280 to 320, you're going to use that between coats of paint. Like I said, maybe you need to, erase a few brush strokes before you put a top coat on. It's just going to give you that smooth finish when you're kind of done with the project, and you're going to now apply some kind of finishing. If it's a top coat, if it's a glaze, if it's wax, whatever you're using, that's when you will use that extra fine sandpaper. So I have a wood box that I picked up at a garage sale or something, and it kind of lines up all of my sandpapers in order. And then I have like a separate container. You could do anything, Ziploc bags, whatever's easiest for you. For those sanding, when you're in between grits and, you have to keep changing them, but yet there's still some good sanding. You could still use the sandpaper on other projects. So I kind of save those to the side while I'm sanding, as if I get through a piece of sandpaper that I know is not going to be used again, like it's done, I kind of throw that down on the driveway so I know that's my garbage pile. Like those are not going to be used again. You kind of get in a routine of that, because the worst thing is when you go to start a project and you have somehow picked up all of the sandpaper that's really not good anymore, right? Like the grit that you need, it's all worn down. And then you find out that you're out of 80 or you're out of 100, whatever, because you just didn't notice that it was out, and you kept picking up the ones that should have been thrown out. So definitely get in that habit of doing that. And like I said, some of the grits you're going to be able to use more and more and more than the others. And there's been many times when I've gone back and forth, and I'll have some on the ground as I'm working, and then I'm just picking up, trying to find a little bit of some sandpaper that's still good on a piece of sandpaper that I can still use. So, but yeah, so this was a question that I do get asked a lot. What do I need to use? What do I need to have on hand? What should I buy? When do I use what? So I hope this was helpful. You can refer back to this. I will definitely put my favorite sanders inside the show notes so you can check them out. But if you have any more questions about this, please let me know. Lindsay@mycreativedays.com. You can message me on Instagram @mycreativedays. And like always, if you have a question like this, or something you would like me to talk about or discuss, or anything like that, please email me. Please reach out to me on Instagram. It'll be anonymous. I don't need to share your name, but these questions and things, that's what I'm looking for. I want to make sure that we are producing the podcast with things that are helpful and useful to you. So that's the most important thing. So, okay, go get your sandpaper, share your projects, tag me on Instagram, and I will talk to you guys really soon. Hello, friends. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. I'm grateful that you tune in every week and that you share the show with your family and friends. I love having creative chit chats with you, and my hope is that this podcast will inspire you to try a new project, start a DIY that you've been putting off, and decorate your home exactly how you want it. There are a few ways you can help us with the podcast. Follow the podcast so you don't miss an episode. And if you could take a few minutes to leave the podcast a review, that would help us so, so much. Again, thank you for being here, and I look forward to our chat next week. Bye-bye.